I'm Mike Uyak. I love to try new things, and I've had culinary adventures all around the world as well as right at home. I've had really wonderful food, as well as some really horrible food as well. I'd like to share some of my adventures with you, and we'll see if I have what it takes to fix whatever goes wrong. This is Recipe Redemption. Hello, and welcome to Recipe Redemption. Last week I began my Market of Mystery segment, and one of the suggestions that I got wasn't really a mystery ingredient at all, but rather one that my friend and probably many people like him just simply hate. So today I'm not going to delve into the Market of Mystery per se, nor is this a recipe redemption either, but I suppose it may be an attempt to redeem an ingredient. Which ingredient? This one! Ha ha! That's right, the lowly Brussels sprout. A lot of Sturm and Drang is stirred up over this little green spheroid, partly stemming from our veggie-phobic society, partly from the spread of anti-Brussels sprout propaganda, and partly from exposure to badly prepared Brussels sprouts. If done properly, they are a delicious and healthy addition to a well-rounded diet, but if done improperly, well, childhoods can be forever marked by traumatic memories of dinners gone terribly awry. In fact, my 12-year-old self would probably be aghast at hearing the words I'm about to say. I like Brussels sprouts. Now. But I had some re-education to do before I could get there. It may prove useful to back up and discuss the Brussels sprout itself, because some people simply view it as a green alien pod full of bitterness and evil. So, what do cauliflower, broccoli, Romanesco, kale, kohlrabi, oriental and black mustard, bok choy, and Brussels sprouts all have in common? They're all cabbages. Brassica oleracea is commonly acknowledged as the ancestor of most modern cabbage varieties, originally found in Britain and Northern Europe. It's a loose-leafed and fairly fibrous plant. It was eaten by hunter-gatherers for who knows how long, and was finally cultivated at different times in different regions sometime between 2000 and 1000 BC. As its cultivation spread, it began a slow process of selective breeding by the cultures that farmed it, gradually tailoring it to suit the needs and tastes of the local diners, until we arrive at the modern day, when all these now vastly different varieties rejoin with their distant cousins in our local supermarket produce aisle. Most shoppers are completely unaware that a good quarter of the produce aisle is populated by a single genus of leafy vegetable. Brussels sprouts, despite the name, originated in the Mediterranean coast along with several other varieties of cabbages, but gained its name due to its much wider cultivation in Belgium, starting in about the 13th century. Unlike other cabbage varieties, the leaves are tightly packed around the central core, and unless allowed to grow unchecked, remain that way at the time of harvest. The problem that people have with Brussels sprouts is the same problem they have with many other cabbages, only on a more compact scale. When the leaves are damaged, the cells release a chemical called sinigrin, an organic sulfur compound that degrades to give off an unpleasant odor, especially as the vegetable is cooked. If overcooked, a Brussels sprout, like other cabbages, turns an unpleasant gray color and becomes soft and mushy. Add to that a natural bitterness that only becomes more pronounced with cooking, and you've got a vegetable that is not always easy to love and requires a little care in handling. So, to prevent the release of excess sinigrin, you don't want to mash your Brussels sprouts too much or abuse them. Always cut with a slicing motion rather than a straight chop to ensure you don't actually crush the leaves. You don't want to damage them any more than you have to. And to keep them from becoming overcooked, it helps to cook them quickly on high heat. So roasting and sautéing is really the way to go. Alternatively, Since it is a cabbage, the Brussels sprout can be sliced thinly or shredded and eaten raw as a slaw. As for the bitterness, there's a certain amount of that will always be present, but like with coffee, that can be overcome or even welcomed. Three things really help to tame bitter tasting foods: salt, acid, or fat, or some combination of the three. So, addition of things like bacon. Give your Brussels sprouts a salt kick, a coating of bacon grease, and a smoky finish. Vinegars and lemon juice brighten the flavor and give your Brussels sprouts an acidic tang that complements the bitterness quite well. Other fats like flavored oils help to coat the tongue and prevent you from tasting some of the bitterness altogether. And if you want, sweetness can help as well. Although it doesn't counteract the bitterness of the Brussels sprout, it can help cover it up by giving you something else to think about. So some people actually roast their Brussels sprouts with a sprinkle of brown sugar or even maple syrup, which caramelizes a little as it cooks and adds complexity to the finished dish. So for one dinner, I set myself the challenge of cooking Brussels sprouts 7 ways, which turned out to be 6 plus 1 because I screwed up one and had to cook it another day. I simply roasted some Brussels sprouts with diced bacon. Doesn't get any easier than that. I also roasted some with grapes and walnuts, which then gets tossed with a little bit of balsamic vinegar. I coated some with breadcrumbs and Parmesan cheese and baked that. I coated some really simply roasted Brussels sprouts in a sauce made from almond butter, maple syrup, and sriracha. I made Brussels sprout crostini by shredding and sautéing some sprouts with onion and putting them on cheese-covered toast rounds and broiling that until bubbly. And I topped a decadent 3-cheese pasta carbonara with roasted Brussels sprouts and bacon bits. The plus 1 dish I had to do another day was a Brussels sprout, apple, and bacon galette. Sort of a free-form, panless pie. Reason I had to do it another day is I didn't think about the fact that when you're using pre-made pie crust out of the freezer, you need to actually have the pie crust thawed before you're ready to make your pie, or galette in this case. It was still hard as a rock even when I was almost done with all the other dishes, so I just said, yeah, another day. Don't worry, I'm including the web links for all the recipes if you want to try these for yourself. The video can get a little confusing because I'm trying to prepare 7 dishes at the same time. And I'm modifying them as I go because, one, I'm trying to prepare, essentially cook half, quarter, or even smaller versions of the official recipes, since I'm cooking for just 2 people, and I'm dishing up servings of 2 or 4 Brussels sprouts per recipe, rather than, like, say, a cup's worth, like would normally constitute a side dish. And 2, I didn't have any of these written down, so while I got close to the recipes, I'm not following them exactly, because I'm doing these from memory. With that in mind, here we go. Okay, one of the recipes calls for roasting grapes with the Brussels sprouts. These are champagne-style grapes that I actually grow on the side of my house. The recipe also calls for walnuts, but I don't want to burn them, so I'm going to actually hold off on adding those until about the last 10 minutes of roasting. Another version that I always do is just simply roasting Brussels sprouts with bacon. And as the bacon renders out, that fat will coat the Brussels sprouts and make them salty, smoky, tasty. Next, in a frying pan with a little bit of oil, I'm going to caramelize some onions. To that, once the onions are brown, I add some shredded Brussels sprouts. And about a teaspoon, heaping teaspoon, of minced garlic. That's about 3, maybe 3 cloves. Add about half teaspoon of red pepper flakes, and about a half teaspoon of garlic powder and onion powder. And stir those in. And continue cooking and keep them moving around. Season as you like until they're slightly crispy, a little bit brown. Then take off the heat and set that aside. In the meantime, here I'm going to bread some Brussels sprouts. I have some all-purpose flour, some beaten egg, and then a mixture of breadcrumbs and Parmesan cheese. The original recipe calls for panko. I forgot to get some, so I'm just using breadcrumbs. Once your Brussels sprouts are breaded, place them on the baking sheet along with the rest of your vegetables to be roasted. If you're doing this separately, obviously, you wouldn't have those. In the meantime, I've sliced a mini loaf of French bread into little slices, little toasts, and I've sprinkled a cheese mixture on top of it. And on top of that, my fried Brussels sprout and onion mixture. Don't be too precious with this, just go ahead and dump them on there. And I'm going to add a little more cheese on top of that, and when that melts, it'll kind of hold everything in place. And again, don't be too precious with this, just sprinkle it on. And place that into a 350-degree oven for about 15 minutes, basically until the cheese melts and browns a little. While everything is baking and roasting, I have some time to make the sauce that I'm going to toss some of the Brussels sprouts in. This is just a mixture of almond butter, on camera it'd be great, almond butter, maple syrup, and sriracha. Basically about 2/3 the amount of sriracha as almond butter and or maple syrup. And it'll take a little while to mix that together. It might help if you heat the almond butter a little bit ahead of time in the microwave. Just give it like 10 seconds. Alternatively, it says you can thin this with some almond milk. I find that water works just as well. Now I can turn my attention to the carbonara. I'm going to take some chopped bacon. Oh heck, use all of it. And put that in a pan, render it out. Once the bacon is cooked, it's brown and starting to become crispy, take it off the heat, remove the bacon, keep the bacon grease. And to the hot bacon grease, I'm going to add some chopped onion and some garlic. Stir that around until the onion becomes caramelized. In the meantime, while that's cooking, I'm going to crack an egg into a bowl and beat it. To that, add some cream. Recipe calls for heavy cream, if you've got it. And to that, I'm going to add a mixture of minced chive, Parmesan cheese. If I can get it all out of the bowl. There we go. And I used Jack cheese. They asked for Asiago. I didn't have that on hand, so I used Jack cheese. Any good melting cheese. And to that, add the zest and juice of 1 lemon. And stir to combine. Just going to add that egg and cheese mixture to my frying onions and whisk briskly to combine. It's going to cool down the pan a little bit, but you still want to keep it moving. You don't want the egg to actually scramble. It's there to thicken the sauce, and what you're making is a sauce. Oh, by the way, on the side I had some pasta boiling. so that once the sauce begins to thicken, I can take my cooked, drained pasta and toss it right in. So it can become nice and coated with the sauce. I like to cook the pasta just a little bit more than al dente, I guess you could say super al dente. It still has just a little bit too much bite to it, so that when you add it to the sauce, it will cook the rest of the way and still have a nice texture to it. In case you thought I forgot, I'm going to pull the pan of roasting Brussels sprouts, and to the corner where I have the Brussels sprouts and grapes, I'm going to add the walnuts in and let those cook for another 10 minutes. And it's plating time. First, in a small ramekin, I have some of the pasta carbonara. Atop the pasta, I'm going to take some of the plain roasted Brussels sprouts. Just put like 3 or 4 halves on there for this particular size ramekin. Obviously, if you're using a full-size portion, you're going to have more. And then I'm going to sprinkle some of the cooked bacon bits on top, because bacon don't need no reason. In a bowl, I'm going to take some more of the plain roasted Brussels sprouts, and I'm going to toss to coat with the sriracha peanut butter and maple syrup mixture. Now, I made it kind of thick, but the heat of the cooked Brussels sprouts is going to help loosen up that almond butter, so it'll actually coat. I wouldn't worry about it too much. And then just place on the plate. Next to that, I'm going to place some of the breadcrumb and Parmesan cheese coated Brussels sprouts. Those actually make decent hors d'oeuvres too. I would season them well. Next to that, some of the grape and walnut Brussels sprouts. Turn out to be quite tasty. I learned from this that because the grapes tend to shrink and or burst in the roasting process, you want to actually have a lot more of the grapes than Brussels sprouts. And I'm going to sprinkle that with a little drizzle of balsamic vinegar just to give it a little acidic tang at the end. Next to that, I'm going to place a couple of the Brussels sprout and cheese toasts. And I'm just going to break off little bits of cheese that kind of dribbled and burnt on the sides, and eat those myself, because it's good to be the chef. And on the other side of the plate, here are some of the just plain roasted Brussels sprouts with bacon. It doesn't get any simpler than that. I know that the trauma of a bland, bitter, overly boiled or burnt batch of Brussels sprouts can leave long-lasting scars, so I'm not going to convince you that they can be good eating overnight. But if you learn to treat them right, maybe you can slowly learn to appreciate them better. As I've shown, the recipes I've cooked, with the exception of the galette, can be scaled down to even cooking just 4 or 6 sprouts at a time. So please try these out if you happen to have the ingredients, or do your own research and try other recipes and scale them down so you only have to choke down a couple of bites. And maybe, just maybe, you'll discover they aren't as horrible as you remember, that perhaps you'll turn to the green side, in a good way. So, tell me what you think. Share some of your recipes for Brussels sprouts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already done so. Until next time, this is Mike Uyak, and I bid you good eating. Okay, for the galette, as before, we're going to saute some onions. This time I'm just going to sweat them. And I'm going to toss in some shredded Brussels sprout and chopped apple. Seasoned with a little salt. And I don't want to cook these too brown. I don't want these to brown too much. I'm going to add a little bit of mustard powder to this too, by the way. These are basically going to cook twice, so I don't want to really cook them too much. unroll a pre-made pie crust. The original recipe actually tells you how to make pie crust, and mound some of the cooled apple and Brussels sprout mixture in the center. You want to make sure this is cooled, because otherwise it's going to melt the butter in the pie crust and you're going to have a goopy mess. Now you notice that I have made 8 slits around the circumference of the pie crust. That's so it creates these flaps that can then be very gently folded in toward the center. And see what I mean about doing things with warm things. The pie crust is still really floppy, but it is manageable, so I'm managing, especially doing this one-handed. So these can be folded in like so. And then I'm going to take it and brush it with an egg wash, and this is just 1 egg beaten with about a teaspoon of water. And this is going to help that pie crust get nice golden brown delicious. And then over the top of that, I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit of salt just to up the flavor profile a little bit. Just a little bit of kosher salt on top. Then I'm going to pop that into a 400-degree oven for about 30 minutes. Look at that. Golden, brown, delicious. Nice and firm. Center is mostly intact. It doesn't want to fall out just when you cut it. I would cut this into about quarters. This is not exactly health food, so bon appetit.